Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. A Love Unstoppable. Episode 6. Chapter 67. I don't understand, I said, because the more he explained, the harder it became for me to understand. 6 years ago, I was in search of a mate. Every alpha needs a mate. But unlike every alpha that just needs a mate, I needed a true mate, one meant for my soul. They would be the only one who can balance the power that surged through me. He took a deep breath, and his eyes fluttered to reveal his difficulty in saying this. 6 years ago, I was on a mission to find her, and I found you. You weren't a wolf, as I expected. You were human, and I didn't prepare for that. At first, I thought it was a mere physical attraction, but the closer I was with you, the more out of control I was, and I had to succumb. All alphas of my bloodline dating back to the great alpha king Xavier Ainsworth, all had wolf mates, so it made me question everything. It also made me question why I had the feeling I'd have if I met a mate. The moon goddess's ways aren't ours, and so I was going to hold on to you because it pleased my soul to do so. I also knew what that meant. We were two different people, and I wasn't sure you would ever understand or accept me if I was completely open to you. Asking you to stay was the first step, and when you said you'd think about it, I waited, but never got your response. After a few months of waiting, I knew the time I had was short and doubt set in. Perhaps you didn't feel what I felt, and that was why you didn't reach out as I wanted. If the feeling wasn't the same, then you weren't my mate, and that made me move on to find my true mate. Not long after I met Nicole Kent, the daughter of the Alpha of the New Age Pack and future Luna, and we clicked off. He paused, and I knew he didn't want to speak anymore, but he had to. I had to know. My feelings grew for her, and I believed she was the one, despite the small empty side of me feeling incomplete. She told me she felt the same way I did and received visions that we were meant to be, and I believed her. We moved to the ceremony of mates and we were joined. After mating, rather than the balance of the powers, I felt a block. The deterioration speeded up instead of stopping. My feelings grew for her, and I believed she was the one, despite the small empty side of me feeling incomplete. She told me she felt the same way I did and received visions that we were meant to be, and I believed her. We moved to the ceremony of mates and we were joined. After mating, rather than the balance of the powers, I felt a block. The deterioration speeded up instead of stopping. I knew I had marked the wrong one, and that was my punishment for not following my instinct. She lied to me and sped up my demise. I broke the union and sent her away, never to return 1,000 miles from me and my pack. I thought she came with the best of intentions, but I soon realized she didn't. She came hoping to damage my bloodline. The Hearts had the strongest bloodline, and that made me the strongest alpha to exist. Many alphas, including her father, wanted that title for themselves, and this was the way to get it. I only found out when it was too late. The damage had been done and I live with it while every day I prepare my pack for my demise. With Zion as my son, the legacy of the pack and our bloodline will be preserved because the same power that flows in me flows in him as well. In all he said, all I took was if I had reached out to him, perhaps his days wouldn't be as numbered as they were now. If I had confronted him that weekend when I heard him on the phone and have him explain himself, we would have reached an understanding then instead of now. This was my fault, and the guilt crushed me. How do you know I am not a mistake on your part? How do you know that I'm your true mate? Because only a true mate would be strong enough to bear the alpha and offspring. Oh, was all I said, and I slowly sat down in bed, pondering on everything he had said. He knew I was his true mate the first time he met me at the bar, but finding me with Zion when he came back further confirmed it, yet he stayed off. I read a lot about werewolves' bond with their mate and how hard it is to control their emotions and feeling around them, and yet he somehow controlled himself around me most times we were together. He had been better than most men and I gave him no credit for it, and now all I wanted to do was to be here and write for him. I know this is a lot to take in, but I have to be honest with you. I did not just give up. I did all I could for 6 years, and yet I couldn't change my fate. I have nothing left but to just accept my fate. Live happily for the little time I have left and make the woman I love happy. Thank you for being honest with me. I know it must have taken a lot to say this. I reached out and took his icy hand between mine, giving it a light squeeze. You're right, he said, and I looked up at him with eyes of curiosity. About what? About not giving up. I don't want to die. I have so much to live for. I have you, Zion, my siblings, and my pack, depending on me. I have to find the courage to keep fighting for you all. Others might have accepted their fate, but I don't have to. I will be the first to fight. A smile came onto my face and I pulled closer to him, placing my lips against his for a kiss. I placed my forehead against his and stroked his face. And I will be beside you every step of the way, doing everything that I have to. Thank you. I did nothing. You just gave me the courage to keep fighting and not give up. That is everything. He leaned in and kissed my lips again. Chapter 68. The semester, which began not so long ago, was almost in the middle now. The days were flying, and I was barely keeping up. This time last year, I was the sole guardian of my son Zion, with a little help from Dia's parents, and yet I had my life under control. Now I had Aaron and his siblings, Lionel, Dia, and her family helping with him, and yet I barely had anything under control. Well, last year you didn't have the man you call Aaron on your mind and body now and then, and you also weren't aiming at a PhD. True to that, but I wish I could get everything in check. Now I felt like a clumsy mother whose only care in the world was giving her boyfriend an anywhere and everywhere. The ex was great, and despite having told Aaron it was the last time, the millionth time, it wasn't. He wanted me and I wanted him, and saying no to him wasn't an option. In the last month, I noticed how his desire and cravings were when the full moon approached, and, most times, I could barely keep up with them. I was human and my stamina couldn't match any werewolf, much less an alpha, yet he couldn't get enough of me. I wore a scarf around my neck most days because it was marked with love bites and marks, and the sight brought back memories. The search for a way out of Aaron's fate had begun for a month now, and we remain optimistic every day about something positive. I also dedicated myself to my research in the werewolf lore and myth books available at the library. There were about 4, and the 3 I had bought had no mention of the curse of power in them. I still didn't give up. I had 1 more to go, and if I still had nothing, I'd keep searching. I feel it in my guts that we are closer than ever to the aversion of this cruel fate, and I had to keep the fate. I got down from my car and headed for my office when my phone buzzed loudly. I reached for it in my bag and saw the caller ID as Tatiana. Hello. Hello, Zara. How are you? Her small voice came through. I'm good, and you? Very good, Zara, she responded, and took a pause. Are you still up for the picnic later today? She asked with hope in her voice. It was an arrangement for the Addams sibling to meet up and catch up. At the outing, we would get to tell each other about our past week's experience. We had done it once since this month started, and the first was a great experience which prompted us to organize the second. It was a family only, and so I told Aaron when he asked if he could come 2 weeks ago that he couldn't. Tatiana and I were now working on our relationship. It wasn't the best yet. I still had unresolved feelings toward her, but she was my sister and I know it's what our father would have wanted. She was just a naive girl who thought she knew better. Lionel also supported our attempt at repairing burnt bridges and had joined us in ensuring that if Betty knew her children were getting over the past and working on a better relationship with each other, she said nothing to it. I didn't put many minds on her, though. I forgave Tatiana for her past errors, but I wasn't sure I could do the same for Betty. While my sister's only fault was thinking her life would be better with Owen, Betty did much worse. From putting me down to sabotage and putting all the blames in the world on me, especially after my father's death. Her words left scars that were still healing and I know she doesn't care or see the pain she caused and so I believe it was best to keep her far from me. Tia told me Betty didn't support her decision to leave Owens even after proof that he had cheated on her multiple times came up. In Betty's words, no marriage was perfect, and she could work on making it better. Tia told me she felt hurt and abandoned and when she thought our mother would stand up for her, she didn't. Mother had always had her eyes on the luxury Owens and his family could provide hers, and she ignored everything else. Tia now lived with Lionel, as she had nothing to fall back on after leaving Owens. We believe soon she would find her feet again. Yes, I remember, and I will be there. I pushed open the door of my office and there stood Aaron beside my chair, close to the window in a pair of blue suit and trousers, already waiting for me. Yes, I remember, and I will be there. I pushed open the door of my office and there stood Aaron beside my chair, close to the window in a pair of blue suit and trousers, already waiting for me. He looked all dressed and ready for his day at the office. Ever since the Hart Company officials moved over to the States last month, Aaron had not been involved in running it. He'd been more dedicated to his research and to finding a way out of his fate and the little time he had left he spent on me. Seeing him all dressed up was an alluring sight to see. Good, then. She sounded excited. See you there then, and have a nice day. You too. I slipped my phone into my bag and approached my seat, where Aaron stood beside me. What are you doing here? I asked, my brow narrowed. I thought to see you after dropping Zion at school, but you don't look too happy to see me, he said in a dramatically sad tone. I was happy to see him, but he'd done things in the past that made me not want to see him before my first class begins. Things that had my legs up in the air and me moaning with my back on the desk. I set it on the table and crossed my arms over my chest. I am happy to see you. I'm not excited about it. I know what you want, and I'm not ready to give it. A coy smile came onto his face. What, then, do you think I want? Me, I answered blankly. I didn't want to sound smug, but I knew what he wanted whenever he showed up unannounced like this, and he knew what I wanted whenever I did, too. He grinned, and those dimples came into display. If you weren't on my mind all night, perhaps I wouldn't be awake wanting you and needing to come down here to see you. In conclusion, this is your fault, he accused. I couldn't believe my ears, but this was Aaron, and I shouldn't feel surprised. I have a class by 8 and I can't do what you want, sorry. He glanced at his wristwatch before turning to me with a hopeful look on his face. We have 20 minutes, he informed me. No, we do. I have to revise and have all my facts straight before leaving for class. Last week you had me so disoriented I couldn't give the proper function of a heart. I lashed out, remembering how awkwardly the student stared at me when I kept mumbling instead of giving answers. It was good, he said, a smirk dancing at the corner of his lips. My eyes fluttered, thinking back to the feel of his tongue on me and how shaky my legs were after I came crashing from the height. It took me a while to think straight and even walk. It was one of the best I'd gotten from him, and knowing he had given me that with just his mouth gave me a gratifying feeling. "Wasn't it?" he asked, and I snapped out of my thoughts to find him standing before me, his gaze locked on my lips. I bit my lower lips and nodded. "It was," I answered. He leaned in and took my lips into his for a soft and mind-numbing kiss. I kissed back. I glanced at him, not wanting to miss the reaction his face gave. "This is what you want, big guy?" He ran a shaky hand through his neatly arranged hair and nodded. "Yes, love, touch it so well." I couldn't help my smile. I always loved it when he let go in my hands. He took control and care of me most time, and so the little times I got to be in charge of his pleasure, I made the most of it. I tightened my grip around him and he hissed out, his eyes fluttering. He cussed out and his hand came to grab me by my hair and then moved to settle at the back of my neck. I relaxed my throat to take more of him into my mouth while still stroking him. I felt him pulse in my mouth, and I knew he was getting closer with my head. "I want you, love. How much longer do we have?" I asked. He glanced at his wristwatch, then turned to me with an unreadable look on his face. I was certain we had spent over 20 minutes here, and I didn't know how to feel about it. I cussed and began getting up. "Don't get up," he exclaimed, his eyes wide and desperate. "How much longer?" I demanded. 5 more minutes, he said, tightening his arms around my waist, and he began thrusting into me. My eyes rolled to the back when he hit my spot, and he does it a few more times before I fell from the height of ecstasy. We stayed still for more than a minute, trying to recover a little of our spent strength. When he said, "Thank you," I lifted my head off his shoulder to stare up at him. I kissed his parted lips before climbing off him. I adjusted my panties and pulled my gown down. I beheld my face in the small mirror I picked out of my bag, and once it was okay, I slipped it back into my bag. "Have a nice day at work," he said, still not bothered to move from the position where he had his release. I smiled, "Thank you, and you too." He winked at me. "I already am." Chapter 69. I told myself the last time I came into my office and found Aaron there would be the last time we'd do anything in my office, but I couldn't keep to my words, especially when Aaron was involved. Sex before work had now become a frequent thing. I enjoyed it and won't be a liar, but the effect was getting worse and I couldn't stop myself from wanting him whenever I saw him. We barely had time to ourselves because of our work and other responsibilities, so this worked best. Aaron adjusted his brown trousers and rose to his feet. He looked dreamy in his white long-sleeved shirt tucked into his trousers, and it was the sight that made me lose control this morning. I rubbed my hand over my face after adjusting my suit and pencil-mouthed skirt. "We can't keep doing this at work." I know. He took a step toward me. "I know, but sometimes I just want you so much it drives me crazy." He kissed my cheeks, down my neck. I wanted him to, and it was hard to control, but this was also my job, and I couldn't keep doing this to my students. They needed the best, and I had to give it to them. Anywhere but here. "I want you to, but wanting you would mean neglecting my responsibility as a lecturer to my students. I think they deserve more than that, and do not tell me to quit my job." I said because the last time I spoke about this in his place, his suggestion was for me to quit my job, and I remembered how angry I got at him. "I will not say that." He raised both hands in surrender. "I understand, and that's why I'm going to propose that you move in with me." I gave him a look of disbelief, but the hand he held out had a key in it. "You're not serious, are you?" "Well, I've got the house key in my hand. I have to be serious at this point." He said. If you move in, we can do things together. Take care of Zion together, and then we will have more time to ourselves. I stayed silent, thinking over what he had just proposed, but not taking the key in his hand yet. Would Zion be able to adjust to the changes? I think so. He's seen us together in the last few months and can figure out something is up between mommy and daddy. His last line made me chuckle and roll my eyes because indeed, Zion had asked a few questions in the last few months about us. You're just saying things to make me accept your offer of moving in. He grinned. I get to kill two birds with one stone, so it's a happy deal. Despite having taken the key before he left, I told him I would think about his offer. My class was long but engaging, and I had worked to get more control over things. At the end of the class, Myra, a second-year student of mine, hinted I had a glow, which I didn't think was a thing. I had to look it up and discovered that it was. Oh, how red my cheeks became! After the class ended, I spent the rest of the hours at work researching on the internet for clues about the curse of power. I finished reading the 4th book of the Werewolf myths and lore 2 weeks ago, and after finishing the 300-paged book, I didn't find the information I needed or anything related to the curse of power, which was what I wanted to find. It frustrated me, but I had to keep going. At 5 p.m., the reminder I had set for the third Adams picnic we had planned out for the day went off and I shut down my laptop. Though I got up and got ready for the outing, my mind remained on my failed attempt at finding a way out for Aaron. His people were also out finding a way out, but I wanted to do my part. I promised Aaron I would give him an answer soon about moving in, but that wasn't as easy as saying the words. He would get my answer, but I had to think things through properly. Your mind is far away, Tatiana said, and I glanced up to find hers and Lionel's gaze on me. I shook my head and picked up an spring roll Tatiana brought along when she was coming over. Just work and other related thoughts. I shrugged it off. Do you want to share? Lionel asked, sounding concerned. I wanted to share because a problem shared has always been a problem solved, but Aaron had spoken about how important it was to not disclose information to the wrong person. I trusted Lionel and Tatiana was slowly earning my trust, but I didn't know what other ears were listening to me talk, and so I said, Aaron asked me to move in with him. This wasn't what I was thinking about, but it was helping shift their attention from the truth lying underneath to something else. Tia's eyes sparkled in delight as I said those words. You don't look so thrilled about it. I don't know if I'm ready for such a big move, I revealed, and that was really a genuine fear of mine. I wasn't sure I was open to that yet. You two have been together for a long, right? She asked, not seeing the reason for my fear. It's been a few months. I nodded, but my fear was not because of how short we've been together but something else. Aaron lived at the Pack Estate, and the Pack Estate, according to what I knew, belonged to members of his packs who were also werewolves. Moving in with him would make Zion and me the only humans to live there. Unlike Zion, I had human blood flowing through my veins, and that meant I would be the weird one there. Of course, I couldn't tell them all of that without making them raise a brow, and so I remained quiet. For the rest of the picnic, I buried my thoughts and focus on the moment I was having with my family. Tatiana disclosed she got an interview with a cosmetic store and she was told to expect a call in soon. I couldn't help feeling happy for her. She was finding her feet, and it made me proud. The smile on her face was impeccable, and I could only hope for the best from here on. Lionel spoke about Ceci and his failure to stop thinking about her. He told me he knew she would never consider someone like him as anything more, but he wanted her to. I told him to not give up and that if he believed what he felt was genuine, he should fight for it. They looked great together the few times I'd seen them together. Lionel was getting his life back, and after his recovery from the accident, he returned to art, which was what he loved. Things could fall into place in a better way for the Adams for the first time, and I was ready for it. This distraction was what I needed. Chapter 70. I stopped by the bookstore to get Zion a few new books since we were all done with the bedtime stories we had at home. Last week, he asked if I was about to read him the Ninja Turtle where the short, bad guy got caught in the end. I didn't need another clue to know he was tired of the always repeated story already. I made plans to branch out at the bookstore today before going home. I would get 4 new storybooks for now, and once they get exhausted, I would go for another. "Good evening, ma'am," the older lady behind the counter spoke at my entrance into the bookstore, her eyes staying on me. I flashed a bright smile. "Good evening." I moved over to the counter where she stood behind and placed my hands on it. "What can I get you?" the polite lady asked. "I need at least 4 intriguing storybooks for a 5-year-old boy." Her brow rose in interest. "Ah, the ever-curious 5-year-old boys, eh?" I chuckled. "Yeah, he is. Does he have a preference for the stories he listens to?" I shrugged, knowing Zion was a lover of adventure but would settle for any other genre as long as they were interesting. Not if they are engaging. "He's open to it," I answered. "Just a minute," she said, and went through the door that leads to the inner room of the store, and I waited patiently. She returned with 3 books in her hand instead of 4 and placed them on the counter. I glanced at the first that caught my curiosity, titled The Curse of the Lone Wolf. I picked it up and stared at it closely, only moving my attention when the old woman continued to speak. "It's different from what he's used to, but he will love it," she assured me, her smile not reducing. I wanted to ask why she brought out 3 books when I specifically told her I wanted 4, but I calmed my questions after realizing the books she had brought were bulkier than an average children's book and so would take a while before we finish reading. I nodded and brought out my credit card to pay it up. "I'll call the cashier to come and attend to this," she said, and once again disappeared into the inner room. Not long after, a young girl with dirty blonde hair and a less friendly expression compared to the old woman walked in. She saw me and her eyes flickered in surprise, as if she wasn't expecting to see anyone here. Her brow stayed raised. "How did you get in?" her voice demanded, as if I had done something wrong as she beheld me. My gaze narrowed at her line of questioning and the tone of her voice. She sounded as if I wasn't supposed to be here or I had done something wrong by being here. The door said open. When it's opened, people tend to come in. "We closed 20 minutes ago," she said, with a still annoyed tone, and something about this girl was pissing me off. I dragged a sharp breath. If the sign had said close, I wouldn't be standing here now, would I? Besides, her older lady called you here so I can pay. "What, older lady?" she demanded. My eyes fluttered, my annoyance surging to a degree I didn't want it to go. "Can I just pay and go?" I wanted to leave and kill this infuriating conversation before it got way out of hand. Her gaze narrowed. "Pay for what?" I crossed my arms over my chest. "I am pretty sure there are books on the counter before you. These aren't from this store." She pointed as if I had brought them into the store when I came in. The old lady went into the inner room and brought them out. I explained what happened the best and calmest way I could. "Ma'am, I do not want to sound like I was being a BCH, but there was no old woman at the store. I locked the front door because it was closing hours and I needed to do the calculations for the day's sales. And last, these aren't from this store because we haven't had them in the last 3 years. Parents didn't like that it was too gory and mature for kids." She continued rambling, but my mind stayed stuck on how she had kept this job despite her attitude. That was my greatest shock. Perhaps this was all a huge misunderstanding. I wasn't crazy. The door was open, and there was an old friendly lady that welcomes me in. These books were from the store, but this rude lady here was twisting them around. I do not know if you came to return them and seek a refund, but we can't do that because we don't sell these books. I am about to leave now, so you have to leave first. Can I at least get one book? Zion was already waiting on me to bring a new book home and read it to him before he falls asleep. Leaving without a book wouldn't seem fair. I am sorry, the store has closed. I can't give you any because then I'd have to redo today's sales, and it is already closing time for me, she snapped at me, her tone not in any way polite. My teeth gritted, and I turned to leave when she spoke again. You haven't taken your books. She told me and I stopped and turned to her. The books weren't mine, and I wasn't ready to take them, but Miss Rude here believed they were and I had to take them, besides I wasn't going home empty-handed anymore. Yes, can I get a bag for them at least? To that, she didn't object. She reached under the counter and pulled out the white shopping bag. She gathers the 3 books into the bag before giving them to me. I forced myself to smile. Thank you, I said and exited the bookstore, vowing to never return. Dia already had tucked Zion into bed before I came home because I had stayed longer than I expected. I thanked her for her help for the day, and though she told me to not thank her, I couldn't help it. She asked about my day, but I didn't want to think about how it went, especially towards the end. I showered, changed, and got my bag, and then I picked the book titled Under the Red Moon. I knocked on Zion's door and entered, despite not hearing any response from his room. He was probably almost asleep at this point. I pulled to the bed and found him asleep. I had promised to read him to bed tonight, and I failed in keeping to that promise. He probably waited for me, but couldn't wait for long. I sat down on the chair beside his bed and reached my hand out to stroke his face slowly. I opened the book and on the first page had continued written in italics and my eyes narrowed wondering what the continued meant. I flipped the second page open and began reading. After finding his mate and claiming her as his, the Alpha moved to make it known under the crimson moon. Though I had a foggy mind while reading the first sentence, my mind put the words together to make sense. This was a werewolf lore book just like the ones I've devoted myself to reading in the last week, but unlike those, this was a children's book. I snapped it shut, got up, and hurried away from Zion's room. I entered mine and went through the 3 books I had gotten from the store and set them down on the bed. I folded my arms and read their names. The Claiming Rights, Finding the One, and Under the Red Moon. There was no order in which anyone should read these books, so I sat and picked up The Claiming Rights. After half an hour, I finished reading. The book made 0 sense and then I picked up Finding the One and spent another half-hour reading through it. While the first book was incomplete, the second made a little more sense. I picked up the third, which I had gone to Zion's room with. I took my time reading and another 30 minutes went by. On finishing the third book, I realized I hadn't read them in the right order. It seemed Finding the One was the first book followed by The Claiming Rights and then Under the Red Moon. This was a trilogy series and needed to be read in the right order. I stared closely at the book and found the numbers on them written on each book from 1 to 3, just like I arranged them. These numbers were written on the drawn-out full moon on the bottle right of the book's front page and, being set beside each other in the formal order, the full moon glowed. What were the odds I'd find such books at a children's store? The rude young lady at the store was right about one thing. These weren't children's storybooks, they appeared best suited for adults from the first chapter. The only thing that made it seem like a child's book was the sizes and drawings on them. Then it hit me. Everything wasn't as it seemed. The older woman had gotten me these books from the inner room only for the salesgirl to deny the books and the existence of the old woman at the store. What if the salesgirl wasn't being rude and everything she said was true? What if the old woman wasn't there, even though I spoke to her? What if I had seen a ghost or something else? I shivered. The young lady didn't see any other person at the store but me. I stared at the books with confused eyes and I picked the first book, and despite already reading it before, I read it again. Following it sequentially made more sense, and as I read the last line of the third book, I saw that these are the way of breaking the curse of power. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and dialed Aaron's number, but he didn't answer, and I tried a few more times before giving up and setting my phone down. These books held the answers we'd been looking for in the last few months, and despite them being in a blur, I knew in my heart that this was it. The thoughts running through my head were wild, but somehow exhaustion took over me and my eyes slowly shut for the next minutes that followed. Chapter 71. My lashes fluttered slowly, and I found Zion on top of my bed beside me, staring down at me. It was morning, and he had woken up before me, which rarely happened, but last night I had spent hours reading until it was way past my bedtime. This was one of the side effects of sleeping late, turning your alarm off, thinking you'd wake yourself, but not being able to. "Mommy, wake up," he said, placing his hands on my shoulder and shaking me. I'm up. I pulled myself up and sat down, my head aching a little, and I rubbed my temple to ease the pain and discomfort. "Let's get ready, Mommy," he said, and got out of bed, running out of the room. And that's how my day began. After dropping him off at school a little later than usual, I had one thing in mind: going to see Aaron. I wanted to tell him about the mysterious children's book I got at the bookstore, which spoke of his curse of power. It was weird that Aaron didn't call all morning even though he had seen the missed calls on his phone. It was unlike him, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I called in a favor with Lionel to help me pick Zion up when school closes in case I would be unable to do that. He said he had a less busy day as the art gallery had promised to review his submission and get back to him, and he was now at home doing nothing. Despite the traffic on the road that led to Aaron's place, I reached it an hour later. I had little luck because Yvonne told me he had left the house early to the office for an important business meeting, which would start at 8. He asked what I wanted to meet him for and if it was something he could deliver, but I smiled at him and shook my head. As noble as his offer was, he wouldn't understand what it was about. I needed to find Aaron myself and deliver my message. I had never been to the Hearts Company since they officially opened in the States. I didn't know the way there, but after inputting the address into my location finder, I followed the directions. I drove over to the Heart Company and packed my car in the parking lot. I raced into the building, my legs taking me as fast as they could, while my hands clutched down on the books in my hand. According to Ivan's direction, Aaron's office was on the 5th floor of the building, and so I got into the elevator and pressed the 5th floor. I realized how underdressed I was as soon as I stepped into the company. I was in a pair of black jeans trousers and a white round-necked polo. My hair was in a neat ponytail and I had no touch of makeup on my face. I didn't dress poorly, but this wasn't the place to be dressed in simple clothes. It was an office environment, and everyone wore corporate clothes. I didn't dress up for a formal meeting, and in my defense, I didn't think I would have to come to the company in search of Aaron. I had hoped to meet him at home, but luck was not on my side. Things happen, and they are beyond our control sometimes. This was one of those things, and it couldn't wait. I wished I could become invincible, which would seem better. or for the ground to open up its mouth and swallow me. I walked over to the secretary's front desk and the woman with red hair glanced up at me with an expression so formal I felt out of place. "Good morning. I need to see Aaron Hart." "Good morning, ma'am. Mr. Hart is in a meeting." "Do you have an appointment with him?" the woman with the name tag Ruth Sandler asked. I shook my head, glancing around when I noticed a few eyes on me. "I am his girlfriend, and I need to speak to him. It's kinda important." If she believed the things I just said, it didn't reflect in her expression, as she still stared at me like someone unknown. "He's in a meeting and unless you call him, I can't guarantee you will see him, ma'am." "I cannot interrupt, either. That could get me fired." She simply replied, "If it's really important, perhaps you could call him and tell him." "I've tried, but either he's not with his phone or trying to ignore me." I doubt the latter was the case, though. "Can I just wait then?" "Sure," she answered. I moved to the waiting seat at the reception and sat. An hour passed and yet the meeting didn't end, and the second hour and still the same thing. My stomach growled, telling me I didn't have breakfast before leaving home. Well, I didn't think I'd spend 2 hours waiting just to speak to Aaron. This opened my eyes to the man he was. A businessman that barely had time, but he always had time for me. I didn't cherish that as much as I should have. Now I will. My stomach growled for the second time, and I rose to my feet and approached the red hair seated across the table. "I need to see Aaron now," I said, having a 0 level of patience left. "Ma'am, I can't do that. I'd get in real trouble if I did," she answered, her tone remaining calm and professional. "Now imagine the trouble you'd be in when your boss finds out you kept his girlfriend out here and hungry, refusing to let her see him. You will be out of a job, regardless. Tell me where he is. You don't have to come along. I'll take the blame for the interruption." She sighed, not convinced by the decision I wanted her to make, but not having much choice. "The second door on your left through the right hall," she answered. "Do not get me involved in this, okay?" and I nodded and walked away. I knew the meeting was probably important, but so was this. If you ask me, this was more important because this has to do with his life. Just like she directed, I opened the second door to my left, and I saw the large meeting hall with a large table in the middle and about a dozen people seated on chairs around it, amongst whom were Damer and Ceci. There was a man in a grey suit giving an illustration on the projected screen, and it seemed to be a business meeting about output and revenue generation. No wonder it was taking forever. The eyes of the men and women seated across the table turned to me, including that of Aaron and Ceci, and I felt a chill run through me. I had disrupted the meeting and I doubt the men seated were happy about that. Aaron rose from his seat and approached me. He didn't look so happy to see me, nor did he look angry. I understood I wouldn't feel happy if Aaron had interrupted my meeting, either, but this was important. He came to me and took hold of my hand before turning to the men around. "Please excuse us," he said, and walked out with me. He led me towards his office and I found the eyes of a few staff on me, but I didn't mind. I told myself this was important. He brought us into his office and shut the door. He dragged a deep breath and turned to me, his expression mixed with both confusion and skepticism. My stomach tightened, not knowing if I had done wrong by showing up unannounced. I was the one insisting on space yesterday, only to turn around and do the same thing I condemned all the while. "Hey," I began as he stepped towards me, but his lips meeting mine silenced the words from my mouth. Chapter 72. I smiled and kissed back, wrapping my arms around him. We hadn't seen or spoken to each other since yesterday, and it was nice to know I wasn't the only one missing him. His thumb softly grazed my cheeks, making me melt into him the more. Your phone has been unreachable since yesterday. I left a few missed calls. I pointed it out, and he nodded in agreement. I know. I haven't picked it out of my car since yesterday. I've been occupied with the arrangements for this meeting. I'm sorry you couldn't reach me. I hope you're not mad at me, he said, glancing up at me with curious eyes. I'm not. I'm here for something else. I tightened my grip on the books in my hand. But it might take a long time and you're needed at the meeting. He clicked on his wristwatch and turned away from me. Continued without me, I won't be coming back, he said before turning his attention to me. Now we have all the time in the world. I immediately felt nervous, and I nodded. Okay, very good. My stomach growled louder than it had done all morning. Aaron's eyes narrowed on me, but I didn't let him speak. I didn't eat before leaving the house to see you. I've been to your place. Yvonne told me you were at the company having a business meeting and he told me where to go. I've been waiting for over 2 hours, I finished, touching all the important questions I knew he had in mind. I'm sorry, I didn't know you waited that long. His eyes dropped a little. I shook my head. I was, but it's fine. I'm just hungry. What do you care for? I can get it for you. It's your first time at my company and you deserve to be treated like a queen. He moved to the table and picked up the desk phone. Simply breakfast would do. He dialed a number and requested breakfast. After a little while, breakfast arrived, and I took my time to eat the toasted bread and tea with creamed milk. I didn't fail to notice the unwavering eyes of Aaron, who sat on his desk with his arms folded across his chest. He stared at me with fascinated eyes, but I was too hungry to care. Once done with breakfast, I thanked him, but he shrugged it off as nothing. He leaned his weight against his mahogany desk and folded his arms across his chest. So what was so important you forgot about breakfast? You are, I answered, and though he looked taken aback, he remained silent. Usually, he'd take the opportunity to flirt and try to say impressive words, but right now, he just watched me. Then I told him everything that had happened last night at the bookstore and how I ended up with the books in my hand. So you saw a ghost? He asked with narrowed brows. I shrugged. I don't know what I saw, but the woman that gave me these from the store didn't exist according to the salesgirls, and these books which the woman brought from their store didn't belong to them. That's weird, and I say this as a supernatural creature, he said. What's even weirder are the things in these books. I placed them together on his desk. I think they hold the key to your curse of power. I saw the look on his face and he was trying to not look down on my findings or laugh, and that didn't sit down well with me. I am serious, Aaron. I insisted. Okay, you think the key to my curse is in a children's book? I groaned. This isn't just a children's book. According to the girl at the store, it was taken down a few years ago after parents filed a complaint that it was too mature for kids. They are right, 'cause a child would not understand the context. They also glow in the dark, just like your eyes. If that doesn't answer our question, then I don't know what does. I searched out his eyes, and they looked anything but convinced. He ran his hand over his face. Okay, let me understand this. A ghost saw you at the bookstore, gave you these books and you read them and believe they hold the answers we need because they glow in the dark. My heart clenched in my chest, and I stepped back from him. You do not believe me. I do believe you believe this. Don't do that. Don't patronize me or treat me like a child. I snapped at him, getting irritated at his approach. That's not what I'm doing, and I am trying to understand you at this point. Then sit down and read them. I stepped toward the table and pushed the books towards him. He said nothing else before picking up the first book and taking his seat, and I did the same. He read through it and then the second and then the third, and when he finished, he dropped the book and glanced at me. "It's a nicely crafted storybook," he answered, and I wanted to pull at my hair. "What?" I rose to my feet. I didn't know if he was making fun of me at this point or being serious. "A young wolf boy finds love." "It's a great story," he answered, and if I didn't know him, I would have said he was doing this to get under my skin. "That's what the story I just read is about. It's so much more than that. Either you didn't read it or you're just messing with me." I yanked the last book from his hand and gathered the rest up. "You're pissed?" "Of course, I'm pissed. Do you think I'd bring myself here, wait for you for 2 hours without having breakfast if this was a joke?" He pressed his lips together. "I think you're so invested in finding a way out of this curse that it might mess with your reasoning of things you..." I cussed. I hated everyone treated me as if I was running out of my mind. First, it was the sale girl at the children's bookstore and now it was Aaron. Of all people, I thought he would believe me. It hurts that I was appearing crazy and angry, and those were two things I wasn't. "Zara Adams," he called, and I cast him a glare for calling my full name. He raised his hands in surrender. "I am sorry for interrupting your meeting. You can go back and meet with them and I'll carry my crazy self home now." I turned to leave, but he grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me back so my body collided with his and the books fell to the floor. "You're not crazy, Zara. You're just being concerned." I struggled to set myself free from his hold, but he didn't let go of me and only tightened his grip more until I stopped struggling. My eyes grew glassy. "Don't say things to make me feel better. That's not what I'm doing." I promise. He released me but did it slowly. "I think you believed what you read and I want to believe you, too. I really do, but I think we are not seeing the same thing." I sniffed and blinked the tears back. "I am sorry I cussed at you, I'm just frustrated." "I guess you're right. I've been so involved in this entire process, it's clouding my perception," I admitted, feeling lightheaded. He stooped down and picked up the books now on the floor before rising. "Read it to me," he proposed and gave me one book. I stared at him with skeptical eyes, and he nodded. I collected the book from him. "What do you mean? What you read? I want to know what it was." I bit my lips and blinked a few times before asking, "You're not saying this because you believe it's what I want to hear, right?" "I swear on my mother's grave that I am genuinely curious about what you found out about these books." I dragged a deep breath and nodded, collecting the rest too in his hands. "Okay, the first book in the sequence is Finding the One. I flipped the pages open and Aaron once again leaned against his desk, his attention fixed on me. Young boy Ralph had wanted one thing for the longest time. His mother always told him finding the one was a beautiful thing. It was important to find the one on time, she would always say. "I didn't read that," Aaron said, interrupting me. I lowered the book in my hand. "I am not making it up." I groaned. "I didn't say you were. I just never came across that line." He insisted, approaching me. I must have missed it. He reached for the book and read it out, and what he read was an incomplete sentence. He had skipped many words that would have given more meaning to the story. I drew closer to him, staring at the page he read and noticing he wasn't omitting the words on purpose because he read with so much ease. He paused when he got to where I read before he took the book and turned to me. "We are seeing differently," he said, and after what I just saw, I had to believe him. He handed me the book. "I think you should read the book and I will listen." We spent almost 2 hours on the 3 books. Once the third finished, I closed it up and glanced at him with my brow raised. Do you believe me when I say this is what we've been searching for? He sighed. There was much conviction in his countenance, but he wasn't fully convinced. We can't put all our trust in this. For all we know, the writer had a very vivid imagination. Yes, sure. He or she also can choose who their readers will be. I pointed out in a sarcastic tone. You're right, and we will have to examine the book and speak to the wise one. He rose from the desk he'd been leaning on since I began reading the first book. The wise one? I repeated. He understood my question. They are those who are much advanced in knowledge. They understand and interpret better than others would. Every pack has at least one of those, and Yvonne is the wise one in our pack. So he would have a better understanding. He looked unsure. I hope he does. Chapter 73. He reached for his suit and swung it over my head before striding over to me. He offered me his hand, and I took his hand and together we walked out of the office. I still noticed the eyes of the workers around on me, but Aaron didn't care about any of that, and I knew I shouldn't. I asked what would happen to my car, and he handed the keys to the valet outside. Then he assured me my car would be waiting for me when I got home. It was what I needed to hear. We got into his car as we came out of the building and once inside, he took out his phone from the locker. He dialed Ivan's number and after a few rings, he picked up. Aaron then told him he was on his way home and wanted him there when he came. He ended the call after saying that. Yvonne was already waiting at the study when we arrived, just as expected. Aaron fed him information about the books which I had read to him and how we saw different takes in them. He pointed out how it spoke about his curse, especially when I read it out loud, and I passed the books over to Yvonne at his request. He placed his hands on the books to take them, and I felt a spark charge through the book to the rest of my body. I think he felt it too, because he glanced at me with intent eyes. There are magical elements present in this book, he said, and turned to Aaron. The magic is now wired to her, hence why she sees more than you do. The woman that gave them to me might be a ghost, I told him, going back to where all this started. Yvonne shook his head, debunking my theory. No, I think she might be a messenger of the moon goddess. That's impossible, Aaron said, uncrossing his arms from his chest. Why? You doubt the length the moon goddess would go? He narrowed his eyes at his brother's lack of faith. Why would she care? His brow rose. Because you're still her son, whether or not you believe it, he answered and then turned to me. This was why you wanted to see him in the morning. I nodded. Yes, I thought it was worth sharing. It is. You might have as well saved the life of the Alpha from the strongest bloodline, he spoke, and there was no trace of humor in his voice or eyes. I had to believe. Yvonne asked me to reread while he got his pens and paper to jot down so I can decipher what each word in the book meant. After another 2 hours, I finished reading and shut the third book. Then I glanced up at Yvonne, who had a keen focus on the pages before him. Is there something in there? Aaron asked Yvonne, who stayed silent on the study seat and only stared at the pages before him. Yes, the book calls it For the Fallen. According to these books, there are 3 stages to completing the ritual of the fallen. The full moon mating, the lunar eclipse marking, and the crimson moon blood ritual. I can't do that. Aaron objected, turning away. Why would you say that? I demanded, not knowing why he wanted to back out now, when this was the way out he had always wanted. If I mark you and if this ritual doesn't work out, I will have your soul tied to mine, only to abandon you in the land of the living. You will live a miserable life, longing for your mate and never moving on for the rest of your life. It is the worst fate for a wolf and a cruel one for a human. I understood his fear of the worse, but the best outcome was probable. And if it works, you would live a fulfilled life with your son and me. Isn't that worth trying? These books are not like other werewolf lore, they are magically wired, and I think the last thing they would do is to lead you wrong. His eyes grew weak as they stared at me. He reached out and stroked my face. I would want you to find happiness when I leave. I don't want your soul tied to mine for any reason, and marking you will do that. You will never be happy if that happens, and I can't stand the thought of that. Then let me make that decision for myself. I leaned in and kissed his lips slowly. He sighed and kissed back, pulling me closer and pressing our bodies together as if they were one. He pulled away and pressed his head against mine before nodding. Fine. What is the first ritual? He turned to Yvonne. We have the full moon mating as the first, the Luna eclipse marking as the second, and the crimson moon blood ritual as the third. The ritual should follow their orders and timing. The full moon is a week away, but we haven't had a lunar eclipse in 5 years. Aaron, the pessimistic one, spoke. If this is the moon goddess's plan for you, she will perfect it, Yvonne assured. Doubt still lingered in Aaron's expression as Yvonne exited the room. You're still unsure, I said as soon as the door shut. He didn't deny it because he nodded. I am. I know this is what we've been waiting and hoping for, but I fear it might not be as easy as we make it out to be. I nodded, understanding his point and agreeing with them. When we get to that bridge, we will cross it. After a week of skepticism, I gave my answer to Aaron about moving in with him. It was a yes, and that faithful Tuesday Aaron sent help to aid smooth moving for me and Zion. Moving in with him was much more complicated than staying outside since he lived in the Pack estate. My friends and family would not find it easier to visit as they used to, at least not at first. This, however, was a decision I knew I would regret. I wanted us to be as one family, and this would also help Zion. My old place still had a few months of lease on it, and so I offered it to her. She could not control her joy and gratitude over the phone and told me she appreciated my affection towards her. It was the very least I could do, she was my little sister after all. Aaron was up on the balcony of his house waiting for us, and I couldn't help the smile on my face when I saw him. He beamed at me and raced down to stand before me a second later. Daddy! Zion called out with his hand already stretched out for his father to carry him up. Aaron didn't hesitate before taking him into his arms. Someone excited! He sang. We both laughed. He is happy, that's for sure. I am happy, too. Are you happy? Moving in with me? He asked, and stared at me. I am, I answered with a nod. He nodded, leaned in, and kissed my lips tenderly. I kissed back, and a moan left his mouth. Zion giggled, and we pulled away. My cheeks grew rosy. Come and I will show you the bedroom. Chapter 74. The full moon, which we had highly expected in the last few days, was up in the sky, and we were out in the cottage Aaron had built up in the past week in the field. It was created to appear as if we were out in the open yet provide the safety and comfort of any regular room. They made the roof of the cottage with see-through glass, and that way we could see the moon setting in the night sky while inside. It was noble of him to think about my well-being through all of this. Usually, Aaron led his pack on the full moon, to explore territory and hunt like an alpha does for his pack, but this day, he allowed Damer to take the lead. He didn't tell Damer why he was taking a step back, but his brother concluded it could be because he was counting his days. He did not make our discovery known to anyone else. The three of us were enough, and so he left Damer and Ceci in the dark. It was the best way to keep the wrong ears from hearing it, at least until we were certain of our direction. "This will be over before you know it," Aaron told me, taking my hand into his and giving it a soft squeeze. He tilted my chin up to look at him and he asked, "Are you scared?" Yvonne had broken down the process of each ritual and what we should expect. Tonight was the full moon mating ritual. Aaron barely had any control during the full moon, so mating with him tonight appeared to be impossible, and if it was impossible, then it would be of high risk. I bit my lips and nodded a little. "I can't help it. I'm sorry." "No need to apologize, I understand. It is the full moon. This is when I lack control the most, but I promise I will try my best to not hurt you." The ritual was all about control, the ability of the fallen to prove themselves worthy of control even on the full moon when craving and desires were at the apex. The first ritual was to show the moon goddess that he could stay in control. If he failed, he'd have to try again until he showed control, but since Aaron had limited time, he couldn't afford too many retries. According to Yvonne, he had less than 3 months and had to get the first ritual right at his first attempt. The first ritual, if done correctly, will trigger the force of nature and turn the course of time in his favor to complete the others. With every ritual executed, the length of his day would see an extension to a few more years, and if he completed the 3 rituals, the curse of the fallen will be lifted. "It's time," he informed me. I nodded, giving him my consent. He leaned in and kissed my neck, making me tingle and lean against him. This wasn't our first time together, but there was much vulnerability attached to this. I was trusting him to stay in control while taking me. His hand took hold of the zip of my sundress and he undid it, letting the fabric fall to the floor, and I stepped out of it. The cold of the night gripped my skin, making me shiver. I wasn't used to being out at this time, much less close to naked. I forgot about all that when Aaron pulled me against himself and kissed my lips. He pulled back and stepped away and my skin tightened and goosebumps erupted on my skin at the flare of desire in Aaron's eyes as he beheld me. He cupped my face in his large hands. "I promise I will not hurt you." I bit my lips and nodded, putting faith in what he said. He leaned in again and kissed my lips, snaking his tongue into my mouth, and I kissed back, placing my hands on his shoulders and caressing him there. He kissed my neck, causing a few tingles through my body, and I groaned. He kissed me gently, coaxing my body to trust him for the night. It worked because the next minute, I was on my back staring at the setting moon while he sucked and licked at the weak spot between my neck and shoulder. I was out in here, naked and about to be taken, but I didn't place mind to it. His hands moved from my waist down to my knees and he spread them apart to give him balance while he settled between them. He pulled his lips away, and I stared at him with a slightly parted mouth. He ran a shaky hand through his hair, an attempt at control. "Your smell drives me crazy, my love." He stared at me with lustful glowing eyes. "I can't lose control." I helped myself up to sit, and I wrapped my hand around his neck and pulled him closer. "You won't. I trust you." I licked at his sweet, swollen bottom lips before pulling away. Aaron freed himself of every cloth he had on and knelt between my legs as if at the altar ready to worship, and I watched him. He goes all the way around until he was back at the bottom. My breathing became more rapid. His eyes glowed a shade of red, and the next minute, he took over. His breath became labored, and I watched him writhe and growl as his body trembled, not missing a second of this glorious scene before me. He began regaining himself a minute later, and I saw a mark appear on the upper side of his left chest as the symbol of a moon. I quickly pulled myself onto my elbow, the movement making his now soft member slip out of me. His brows pulled together, and a frown settled on his face. "What?" he asked, probably seeing the interest in my eyes and feeling a little lost with it. "The mating ritual had been accepted and the sign shows on your skin," I answered and trailed my finger over the side of his chest bearing the mark, and at my touch he shivered. I giggled, feeling fulfilled that we had successfully carried out the first ritual and knowing that it worked. He wrapped his trembling arms around my shoulders and pulled me against his chest, while still dragging a deep breath. He kissed my forehead and exhaled deeply. "Thank you for being stubborn. You didn't stop believing even when I thought you were crazy. I owe you so much." I angled my head to steal a glance at him. "You're welcome, and you don't owe me anything. I want you alive because I believe you deserve to live." He leaned in again and kissed my forehead. He gathered me into his arms and took us into the house. When he got to the bedroom, he laid me on the bed and kissed my lips before lying behind me and cradling me. I felt at peace knowing I would not have to say goodbye to him soon. Chapter 75. There is no need to fret. You've been married for just 3 months, Dia. It's too early to declare yourself barren, I said over the phone while arranging Zion's lunchbox. The nanny offered to do it, but I told her I had it under control. I didn't want to give up backing up after my son just yet. Though I knew Aaron had hired her to do the job, it was my joy to do this. We reached an agreement. I would get his lunchbox ready on Mondays and Thursdays, and she could have the rest. Aaron didn't seem too happy about that deal, but there was little to nothing he could do to change my mind. It sounded like a good deal to her because she didn't object. She just nodded and had a big smile on her face. We've been together for over 6 years and we were active through these years, but not once did I miss my period. Of course, I would have room for concern, she answered, and I could tell by her voice she had thought about this all night. Have you told Greg about it? Yes. What did he say? That a baby will come in its time. And he's right. You're not helping, Zara. You're worrying about nothing. Wanting to be a mother while I'm still young isn't worrying about nothing. She snapped at me, her voice becoming an attacking one. Greg doesn't understand that I need a baby. I maintained calmness. You're worrying too much and that stress might contribute to you not finding what you're looking for. She sighed, and I could tell she was rubbing her hand over her forehead. Do you have any pregnancy tips for me? She asked, and I almost dropped the bottle in my hand. You know Zion's pregnancy wasn't something I planned for, right? I demanded, my brows furrowing. Yes, but at least you've had the experience. I think you're high for this early morning, Dia. I will drop by after work today, I said and ended the call. What's got you so worked up, my love? The sleepy voice of Aaron came from the doorway of the kitchen and I turned around to find him naked from the waist up. His hair looked messy and his lips looked tempting and red, calling to me. My eyes lingered at the waistband of his grey joggers and forbidden thoughts raced through my head. Why didn't I ride this man when I got home last night? You were too tired. I've noticed that since the mark appeared on his chest weeks ago, he's been rather shirtless or worn clothes that hinted and flaunted his body there. This was me thinking too much, and it wasn't a good thing. I liked what I saw and I wish I didn't have work waiting for me. It's Dia, I answered and dragged my eyes up to meet the smirk on his gorgeous face. What about Dia? He sounded so curious. I spoke. She wants to have her own child as quickly as possible. Ms. Carter is still young, she has no reason to worry. She'll have hers when the time is right. Somehow this was what I said to her, but Dia had been one to listen to only the things she wants to hear, and that line wasn't what she wanted to hear. I couldn't fault her. This was what she wanted, and she has always been passionate about what she wanted. She asked how I did it with Zion. I blurted while putting the small bottle of water and a cup into his lunchbox. What did you tell her? His eyes lingered on my lips and, as if on instinct, I lapped my tongue over it to get it wet. That I didn't plan for Zion, it just happened. I shrugged, zipping up Zion's lunchbox before pushing it forward. Did you plan to have kids early? He asked, stepping toward me. If by early you mean 21, then no, I didn't plan to have kids that early, but I always thought I'd have my family early, with my husband and child and home before I turned 40. Zion ruined your plan then, I laughed, and my head dropped, causing my hair to fall over my face. Yes, at first, I thought that, but then he became the best thing that ever happened to me. You two are the best things that ever happened to me, he said, and I believe him. He moved the hair strand that fell on my face away, tucking it behind my ear. Then he leaned in and kissed my lips. His lips felt soft, and so was the kiss. My hand lifted to stroke the side of his face while deepening the kiss by pushing my tongue into his mouth. He took the cue for my want and straddled his hand down my lap and then lifted my gown to sink his hot hands over my skin. I gasped into the kiss when I felt his finger push my panties to the side and sank two long fingers into me. I'm going to lat, I stuttered, too affected to utter composed sentences. He kissed the side of my mouth. Not if I don't waste time, he mumbled and seized my lips between his for a devouring kiss while thrusting and rubbing my swollen clit. He reaped the response as my arousal covered his hands, telling him how much I wanted this, wanted him. Mommy, I am almost done with my food, Zion called out, and I pulled away from the kiss, terrified that Zion could walk in any moment from now and find me in an awkward position with his father. I wouldn't be able to explain. I tried to pull away, but Aaron didn't release his hold on me, nor did he stop doing his work with his fingers. I glanced up at him with a questioning look on my face. You're almost there, he said, pushing his fingers deeper, and a moan slipped out of my mouth. He's going to walk in any minute from now, I panted, my hand on his shoulder tightening to give me balance as my legs were already giving up on me. Tell him you will be out in a minute. He leaned in and kissed my neck, adding to the reactions my body was giving and building up the release I knew wasn't so far away. I'll be out in a minute, I yelled and turned to Aaron, who had a commending look on his face. He kissed my lips hard and thrust his fingers into me at a fast pace, twisting and coiling his digit to drive them in at different angles. My eyes rolled to the back, and I slung to him while kissing his lips like I was running out of time. I was close, and he knew because he pulled away and stared into my eyes. I couldn't fault her. This was what she wanted, and she has always been passionate about what she wanted. I came, wanting to scream, but knowing that, unlike the bedroom, the kitchen wasn't soundproof. He pulled out and took his fingers into his mouth, sucking them clean before swallowing. He pecked my swollen and slightly parted lips. Have a nice day at work. Work went by fast for me and it was because I planned my day out, adding Dia to it. Once I closed and picked Zion up from school, I drove us down to Dia's place instead of going home like we usually did. She was thrilled to see Zion and immediately took him to the kitchen and offered him ice cream. The cheerful boy took it and came to show it to me. His way of asking if he could take it. Of course, he could take it. Dia would kill me if I said he couldn't. Dia asked what I wanted, though I replied with nothing. She rolled her eyes and went into the kitchen to make me a quick snack. Greg and I will visit the doctor later this week to run a few tests. She started towards the long stand before the red marble counter at the center of her kitchen. You're putting yourself and Greg under a lot of pressure, I told her after following her into the kitchen. I have accomplished so much in my life, Zara, a PhD and a job that pays over 6 figures annually, which is what I've always wanted, but I also wanted to be a mother, and I feel like I have failed. I saw how much this affected her and I didn't want to be that friend that would argue just to get that point across. I could never know how she was feeling and the most I could do was be a supportive friend like she's been to me for years. I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her, giving her a tight hug. A time will come when you will look back at this moment and laugh because you've gotten all you need in life, I told her, and she nodded weakly. I pulled away and found Greg at the door, staring at both of us with an emotional face. Hey, Greg! I greeted him and stepped back to let Dia do her thing with the pot on the cooker. He smiled at me, his brown eyes warm. Hey, Zara, you came to visit. I had to. It's long overdue, I answered, and even if Dia wasn't feeling down, I still would have visited. Dia and Greg moved into this house over 3 months ago, a month after getting married, and so far I had visited only once. I'd kicked myself many times for not being such a good friend when it came down to visits, but Dia always understood. Maybe even more than I wanted her to. He walked over to his wife and wrapped his arms around her to give her a comforting hug. Leaning down, he kissed her forehead and rubbed her shoulders tenderly. I applied for the break. It should be granted tomorrow, he told her, and she glanced up at him. This had to be because she wanted them to see the doctor, and they couldn't do that if they both had work. Thank you, she mumbled, placing her head on his chest, and he nodded, stroking her face. Anything for you, my love. Chapter 76. Thank you so much for visiting, Dia said as she escorted us to my car. No need to thank me. I should do more. This is enough. You have a life. She told me with an understanding tone. We got to the car and while Zion opened the door and got in, I turned to her. I pray all goes well for you, I want you happy and with your baby. I pulled her in for a quick hug. She waved us off, and I looked forward to visiting again. Driving home took 45 minutes. I did the mental calculation of my time. Including traffic jams would make it an hour and 30 minutes before reaching the house. Mommy, sleep! Zion yelled, and I glanced back to see his weary eyes. I strapped him into the back seat and made sure it was comfortable. That way he could easily do that without stressing himself if he wanted to sleep. Okay, Zion. I beamed at him, and I knew he'd be asleep in no time. After 30 minutes of driving, the empty fuel tank icon popped up on the front screen and I took the turn to the next fuel station I came across. I got down and fueled my truck before moving into the station to pay for it. Doing that took 3 minutes, but since Zion was already asleep, I did not worry. I thanked the attendant at the station store before returning to my car. I slowed down on my steps as I saw a figure lurking around my car. I calmed my raging mind and its many questions and approached my car. The closer I got, the more defined the figure became, and I realized it was a woman. With her face turned away, I couldn't make out anything but her curly brunette hair. I couldn't let my guards down because my son was sleeping in the car which this strange woman was lurking around. I hurried over to my car and spoke when I got to it. Can I help you? She turned around and her eyes met mine. Green eyes, flawless skin, high cheekbone, and defined jawline. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her looks not until she spoke. I don't think so. I am Nicole Kent, Luna of the New Age Pack. With her introduction, I realized who she was. She was once Aaron's mate, the one he told me had lied to him just to ruin his life and haste the demise which came along with his inevitable fate. My guards suddenly shut up to a very high degree. If this woman was everything Aaron said she was, she could cause chaos just for the sake of causing it. She would want to hurt Aaron, and what better way of doing that than harming Zion and me? Why was she back here? According to Aaron, he ended things with her and banished her from his pack, never to return. They were over and had nothing in common anymore, but it seemed she was back now. She stretched her hand out for a shake, but I didn't take it. I just stared at her. She withdrew her hand and flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I guess you've heard about me, she spoke, her voice coming out sweet and harmless. If only that were true. What do you want? I demanded, not wanting to bite around the bush. I don't know what Aaron told you, but I am not the villain here. I never said you were. I just don't appreciate you lurking around my car when you know well you're a stranger. I spoke with cation despite being angry. Yes, I am a stranger, but I am also the closest friend you need right now. Aaron Hart isn't who you think he is, she answered. And I am supposed to believe a word you say? For all I know, you're the bad one. If I was this monster he has made me out to be, I would have moved to snuff the life out of your son. She turned to look at Zion who was still fast asleep and my heart doubled a beat at her words, knowing danger was closer than ever. She then turned back to me, but because that's not who I am, I did no such thing. Stay away from me and my son. I walked away from her to the driver's seat, and I pulled the door open. Say hello to Aaron for me, then. Tell him his Luna is back and sends her regards. She said, and I closed the door. I drove off at a faster speed than I had ever driven my car, and when I got home, I unstrapped Zion and carried him into my arms and took us inside. I laid him in bed and he was still sleeping, and so I let him be. You stayed out longer than you used to. What happened? Aaron asked from across the door of Zion's room. My heart doubled in its beat and I turned to him. He must have seen something in my eyes because his eyes grew concerned and he stepped over to me. What's wrong? He asked, his gaze not wavering as he beheld me. I bit my lips and tried to look away, but he didn't let me, not until I spoke. Nicole. The single words that left my mouth turned his expression from that of concern to fury. His eyes brewed with a dark shade of red and I hadn't seen this much anger in him before and it terrified me. What did she do to you? He asked with his hoarse voice sending chills through me. I shook my head. Nothing. She said to say hello to you for her then and tell you your Luna is back and sends her regards. I answered. This wasn't the only thing she told me, but I felt this was the most important. For all I know, she lied about the others. Did she see Zion? He let go of my face, his attention moving to our sleeping son for a second before returning to me. I nodded. Yes, she did. She said she didn't come for him and also said she wasn't the villain, she only came for you. I don't know which she does better, lying or manipulation. She was aiming to send a message, to tell us she was back. I know her return also means the return of the New Age pack. The ritual we embarked on weeks ago must have signaled all the wise ones in every pack. They have drawn their theories, some better than others. I don't understand. Yvonne told me if the rituals were true, we wouldn't be the only ones to know. The wise ones in other packs will study the change in seasons and times and know something massive is about to take place. If the wise ones can interpret the signs correctly, they will feed it back to their Alpha and Luna and in no time there will be an uprising. I didn't know they would deduce it this fast. Breaking the curse of power would not only save my life, but it would also seal my position as the strongest alpha werewolf in all of creation, and not everyone wants that. What does that mean? My voice quivered as I spoke. He didn't cover it up. He spoke with an honest tone when he said, "It means a war is coming and you're now trapped in the middle of it. And I am supposed to believe a word you say? For all I know, you're the bad one." I tried to sleep that night, but I couldn't. I wanted to close my eyes, but every time I did, the event of the day plagued my mind. When I embarked on finding a way out of Aaron's curse, I didn't know a lot would come at stake, and now I couldn't stop thinking about what I had unleashed. Breaking the curse was a good thing, but I wondered what the consequences would be. Today I realized how vulnerable I and Zion were in all of this. I was still human, the most feeble one. I knew I'd be the first to get hurt in this war Aaron has spoken about. There was a lot to think about: Lionel, Dia, Greg, her family, and Tatiana. These people were now caught at the crossline because of my involvement with Aaron Hart. Guilt ate me up from the inside out, and in choosing Aaron, I had left them vulnerable. I had to ask myself if this was worth it. I wouldn't say Nicole had gotten to me, but she had told me Aaron wasn't who I thought he was, and that had also contributed to my unending thoughts. I wanted to live a normal and quiet life, but normal wasn't for me anymore. The bedroom door slowly cracked open, and I saw Aaron standing beside it. He had stepped out earlier saying something about the study, but I was too lost in thought to hear what he said then. "You're not yet asleep?" I sighed and shook my head. "I am not. I can't sleep." He shut the door and strode towards the bed. He took his seat when he was beside me and took my hands into his for a squeeze. "I'm sorry." I shook my head, but I couldn't say this wasn't his fault because it was all entwined with me being with him. I was so scared for Zion. She could have harmed him if she so wanted to. I told him, the memories of her lurking around my car replaying in my head. "She can't harm Zion," he spoke with a confident tone that made me raise a brow. "And why is that?" "Because Zion hails from the strongest bloodline, my bloodline. He is also innocent, and laying her hands on him would bring the wrath of the moon goddess on her, and no wolf wants that." It was a relief to know that Zion was safe, but there were others at stake. "She said you aren't who you say you are." "What does that mean?" I said with a small voice, and I folded my arms across my chest. "Nicole said that." I nodded. "She did today, and I don't know what she meant." "Is there something I need to know?" He looked almost as clueless as I was, and he either told the truth or was a good liar. "If there was something, I would have told you. If there is something I know about Nicole, she lies and causes confusion wherever she goes. She had done that to me and my brothers in the past. Thank the goddess I knew my brothers better. Aaron had never lied to me, and I wanted to place my trust in him than the vicious Luna called Nicole. I leaned in and kissed his lips. "I believe you," I mumbled into the kiss while deepening it. I took hold of his hands, placing them on my chest and applied pressure on them, telling him what to do. He took the cue and applied pressure, making me moan. If I could get myself to stop thinking about everything that happened today, then maybe I could find sleep easier. Chapter 77. Aaron's POV. I knew the snake called Nicole had planted the seed of distrust for me within Zara. She had always been a master at manipulation. I couldn't believe I once thought she was the one for me. She never was, and like everything else, she manipulated her way into my mind and made me believe that lie. I still remember the night I marked and mated with her. Instead of a restoration of my ever-reducing power, I witnessed a massive loss of the little power I had, and I realized she wasn't the one. She had lied about the spark and bond she said she felt between us. When I confronted her about her lies, she told me I needed her as an ally. She told me she knew too much and would be bad if she took what she knew to the wrong pack. I knew even if I kept her, she would betray me and I ended the union and banished her from the pack, never to set foot there again. I learned she later joined forces with the rebellion pack, our sworn enemy. Nicole had always been about herself and her father's selfish interest, and even after his death, she didn't change. Telling Zara that was her way of planting discord, and I couldn't let her win. Not when I had found myself my true mate, and we were on the way to ending the curse of power and having a blissful union afterwards. Zara leaned in and kissed my lips, pulling me out of my mind. I knew I wanted that, too. I had on. Her hunger was unusual tonight, but I wasn't one to complain. I figured that was what she wanted tonight, and I couldn't help giving it to her. I sealed her lips with mine, and I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her closer. I kissed her, mumbling a thank you before shutting her eyes. I sent out the notice to Ceci, Yvonne, and Damer. I didn't want to inform them about the full moon mating ritual. It had been done with restricted knowledge to most people in the pack, including Ceci and Damer. However, with the appearance of Nicole, I had no choice but to get them all informed and ready for the worse. They were the first I'd disclose the truth to, and the pack would come next. I had sent the signal out 3 days ago, and the last to arrive for the meeting was Damer, and his excuse was a late booking from Ireland. I knew his excuses were lame, but I didn't dwell on it. There were bigger things to worry about. Nicole is back, and that means Theo also is, I said, and I received silence from the three of them in the study. When did she come? Damer asked, finally breaking the silence. A day before I sent the signal. Why is she back? Ceci asked with a suspicious tone from where she stood beside the study window, her arms folded over her chest. I hesitated, knowing neither Damer nor Ceci would like my answer. Because we found a way to break the curse. It took another moment of silence, and I knew from the look on both their faces that they would smack my head if they could. You found a way to break the curse, and you didn't tell us. Damer roared, rising to his feet and running a hand through his hair. I didn't find the way out, Zara did, I answer, and knew that wouldn't reduce their anger toward me. It doesn't change the point. Damer snapped at me, and he had never been one to control his words when he was furious. You cut all of us out of the most important news for the hearts. I didn't cut all of you out, I said, and their eyes followed mine and landed on Yvonne, who has been silent since the meeting started. You knew? Ceci asked in a tone of disbelief. Of course, he knew. Aaron has always had a favorite, and it's him. Damer answered instead, and now that your nemesis is back, you want your siblings whom you shove the middle fingers at to come to the rescue. How amazing! He didn't keep you in the dark because he wanted to, Yvonne began, but Damer wouldn't let him complete his words. You don't get to talk. You don't get to speak, Damer snapped at Yvonne, his eyes blazing red. Having enough of being bullied around by his brother, Yvonne sprang to his feet, his eyes glowing silver instead of their natural blue. You will shut up and listen. The only reason I know about the way out isn't because I'm his favorite, asshat, it's because I'm the wise one in this pack. But your brain has never had control over your words, so I'm not surprised. There was no guarantee what we found was the way out, and until 4 weeks ago, Aaron had massive skepticism. He only found out after the ritual was completed. Why didn't he tell us afterwards? It's been 4 weeks. Because I was tired of giving you all hope, only to have it dashed to the ground. I saw the look on your faces when I was in search of a mate many years ago. I saw how devastating it was for us all. After the way out proved true, I was going to do it and only reveal when it was done. Damer stepped up toward me. You're just saying what you think we want to hear. You know what I have to say? You, he spat in my face. My hand shot out and grabbed him by his neck. I slammed his back into the study wall in a blink, making the room shake. Ceci and Yvonne stood at alert but none tried to step in. The problem with you is you never take the time for proper comprehension. You talk more than you listen and that would be your downfall, Damer Hart. I growled. He tried to pry my hand from his neck, but I tightened it the more. I might still get weaker by the day, but believe me, there's enough strength to leave you numb and defenseless. I get you are furious, but that doesn't give you the right to turn into a grown brat. I unwrapped my hand from his throat and it left a mark that faded within seconds. Damer glared at me. I've been in Ireland in the last 3 weeks, digging through the records of the ancient to find answers when all the while you had the answer. I am sorry for leaving you two in the dark, but if I could go back, I'd still choose to do things the way I did them before. And you might use that as a reason to turn your back on us now, but if you do that and they destroy this family, no, you will never be safe. So you can help a brother you despise or you can spend the rest of your existence on the run. We all know how the Rebellion Pack and the New Age Pack can be. You're asking us to pick the lesser evil. Yes. We both know the only thing that kept them down for years was the truth that I remained the strongest alpha in existence and they stayed silent these past 6 years waiting for my demise. They now know I have a son and would not leave to the life beyond as they expected, so they would do whatever they can to stop me from breaking this curse. You're no better than them and it gives me no pleasure to say this, he said. And I am sorry for making you feel this way. I'm asking you to pick your own. I want to know if there's anything else you're hiding from us, Ceci demanded, and my attention moved to her. There's nothing. I say this before the moon goddess and all beautiful things created. Then you have my support through this, she said, stretching her hand out for a friendly shake, and I took it. You always have my support. Yvonne nodded a little. With the 2 support gotten, we all waited for Damer. I still think you have my support. I could work with that. I nodded at him, showing my appreciation. I'd like to clarify that I have no favorite amongst you all, never have and never will. Ceci rolled her eyes. Everyone here knows you love me more. I laughed. She had a place in my heart as the youngest of the 2, but I'd pick no one over the other when it came to love and care. With the truth out of the way, I moved to tell them about the ritual that is already done and the ones to come. And after the ritual was complete, I got this mark, I said and pulled my shirt to the corner to reveal the full moon engraved on my chest. So the next full moon would be a lunar eclipse? Ceci asked with her brow raised. I nodded, and I knew what her next question was. Does she know you'd be in your wolf's form for the ritual? She's read it a few times, but I didn't think she understood the full concept of it. Trusting me was one thing, trusting me when I was in my wolf's form was another. She had seen me a few times in my wolf form, but it wasn't a form she was used to. I didn't know if Zara was ready, but I had to make her understand what it was all about. I haven't disclosed that information yet. You will have to and let her come into the realization and acceptance of that, Yvonne said. I sighed and rubbed my hand over my face. I knew all that, and I knew what it meant. We concluded by choosing to wait and watch what the move of Theo and Nicole would be. We were uncertain they were working alone. For all we knew, they had rallied other packs behind them, and we had to choose our battles wisely. Chapter 78. Ivan's interpretation of the first ritual had brought about the success of it, but the second one, which he had interpreted, felt impossible. According to his interpretation, the marking would take place when the lunar eclipse was at its apex. For the lunar eclipse to be at its apex, I had to be in my wolf form. The lunar eclipse had a different effect on werewolves as compared to the other full moon shifts. On the lunar eclipse, our wolves would have complete control over their form with minds of their own to do what they liked. I would be in my wolf's form, where I would have little to no control. Unless Ron, my wolf, would give me control, which never happens when he takes over, I could do nothing. Ron had always had a mind of his own. 3 years ago, when he last took over control, was a disaster. He attacked and terrified the entire pack, and he didn't stop until Yvonne forced him out of the lights. I haven't given him control since then. Knowing that Ron would be in control had stayed on my mind since we did the first ritual 2 months ago. With the wolf in control, I would not guarantee what he would do once he takes over. He could turn aggressive and vicious or calm, but knowing I had kept him shut up these past years, I didn't know if he would be so calm. Ceci insisted I explain the reality to Zara, which I did, and when she asked what the probability of her getting hurt was, I told her it was high. Zara coming around for the second ritual wasn't as easy as it seemed. She was terrified, and I was scared as well. My wolf, Ron, was a ruthless side of me. He was bloodthirsty and would attack every and anyone in his way. I never let him come onto the surface, and even when in my wolf form, I have always retained control. I remembered how terrified Zara was 4 weeks ago when I told her about the fate of the lunar eclipse. I needed Ron calm for Zara's sake, so he could mark the way he should. Doing it right was important. There were many risks attached to being marked wrongly, some included bleeding, falling graciously ill or, worse, death. I hid none of the risks when I told Zara the truth, and it terrified her, as it should. I was also terrified. I didn't want to lose Zara, but this was what we had to do. She was to trust Ron, whom I didn't trust tonight, and though she told me she had come to an acceptance of the fact, I could see how terrified she was. She wanted to do this for me, and it was taking almost everything from her to do it. Ron had to create a bond with her so he wouldn't become aggressive towards her at the lunar eclipse. I had to have faith that he would not hurt Zara in the process of marking her. Zara hasn't spoken about it since I told her many weeks ago, and I knew she had thought about it over and over as well. "It's time," Zara said from the window where she stood staring at the night cloud. I didn't need to look to know. I could feel my wolf raging inside me, wanting to come to the surface and dominate as usual. "I know," I said and strode towards her. She turned when I was near enough and I beheld her face one last time. I reached out to stroke her cheek and her lashes fluttered. "We don't have to do this. You know the risk, and one of them is death. I do not want you dead, I need you, and Zion needs his mother. He'll be better off having one parent than none." She smiled and her lashes fluttered. "I know that, but I want him to have both, and yes, I am scared, but I choose to be optimistic." She leaned in and kissed my lips softly before pulling away. Her courage gave me strength and faith that we would see this through to the end. I took her hand and laced our fingers together before departing from the bedroom. Since Damer had been in charge of the pack, I had no worries about who would lead them in times like this. I only had to focus on the ritual ahead. We chose an isolated territory and, unlike the full moon mating ritual, Yvonne had no reason to be with us. I asked him if he was certain about his absence from the territory, and he said his presence would only trigger Ron, who still hated Yvonne for putting a spell of withdrawal on him 3 years ago. Just as I have been in control of my wolf form in the past, Ron has taken control of my human form and made me do aggressive things once or twice in the past, and it was never cool. I had to trust Ron would take care of Zara like I would, and the last thing I wanted to do was trust Ron. "Let me out already," he growled at me, and I released Zara's hand and mumbled an "I love you" before losing control and being shoved to the back seat. Zara stood still, watching as Ron emerged and landed on his paws, tall and arrogant as always. A low growl left his mouth, and he took a step forward. Her hands shot forward in defense and stepped back even as she tried to maintain a steady balance on the ground. "Calm down, Ron. I'm not here to cause any harm. If you and Aaron are truly one, then you'd know by now I want nothing but the best for the both of you, and that's why we are here." Her words weren't getting to Ron because he growled and surged forward, and she took to her heels, running as fast as her legs could take her while Ron chased after her. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.